Mr. Netanyahu. Yes. We have with us now Mr. Uzi Arad. He's a very famous foreign affairs expert from Israel. And my relation with Israel goes back to 2010, when as a young journalist I was invited to be in Israel and understand Israel and its relation with India. So I had a great experience. I was in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem. I not only interacted with the foreign affairs expert, but also interacted with the people from other walks of life. In fact, architecture, outer, and I had a privilege to understand. Now we're going to talk about, geopolitical situation, more or less, and we will understand from you, in context of India, how it's being shaped. My first question to you: Israel and India has been a great partner. Recently, the momentum of our foreign relation has been very open. There's a surge also in the relationship beyond defense, what we call. I would like to know from your perspective, how do you look at India-Israel relation at the moment now, beyond defense?
Well, I think that there is a natural affinity between India and Israel, and that is what allows for the current progress. Initially, you go back 50 years and less, at the beginning there was very little, because it had to do with the international orientation of India at the time, and had to do with the situation in the Middle East at the time. But over the years, with the changing attitude taken by India internationally, and with economics making their being felt more, and with the technological developments also taking place, the room, the common denominators between the two countries had evolved. And it is against that backdrop that you've seen closer and closer Israeli cooperation in more and more fields, some in the strictly economic, and some in the areas of defense and foreign affairs, where we also have now some identity of views on events happening worldwide. Now, looking down the road, I think that there should be, of course, more expansion of it. In the first place, I'm very hopeful about Indian progress. I've been to India several times before, and between those visits, each time you saw the difference. The country is going forward, policies are noticed, and so forth. And and I hope that this rate of growth internationally would also be manifest. It is there that I think that Israel, looking at the future greatness of India geopolitically, would want to maintain good relations with what would be certainly a power factor in the Asian subcontinent, in the Indian subcontinent. So I'm very, very optimistic. The limits to what can be done are often arbitrary. Not too many people in Israel. We are a small country. And sometimes certain cultural differences that have to be overcome, but the potential is there, and I'm sure that we'll see more and more of it for the benefit of both countries.
There are people who are interested, about Israel. They understand the political situation also, but it's slightly complex for a lot of Indian. I want you to make us understand that this Prime Minister, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu, is again in the seat now. And then also, we keep hearing news and allegations against the Prime Ministers, the corruption. It's confusing for us to understand for the readers. Could you simplify what is going on in Israel as far as internal politics is concerned? How do we understand better?
Well, we have to separate the issue of corruption from the other political forces at work. Netanyahu has been now in office almost a total of 13 years, separated by some interval in which he was out of power, and I had the privilege of being his advisor both times.
Yes.
First as his foreign policy advisor, and second as his national security advisor. Netanyahu has been a dynamic force, a man of the world,
Yes.
and he has captivated a lot of support, and as such he's been very, very savvy in managing the Israeli political scene and being re-elected again and again. This is much to his credit. But the country itself is torn in its attitude towards the resolution of the Palestinian issue. Half of the Israeli population would like to see a partition, Palestinian state and a Jewish state. Another half would like to see the entirety as unified and some kind of a federated or binational position with some Jewish dominance. The latter is the right wing, the former is the left wing. Now, somehow the Israeli internal debate has not resolved itself. So Netanyahu so far has led a government which was center-right.
Yes.
There is a possibility that having lost these elections, he may lose power, and in all likelihood, in that case, we will have a national unity in an effort to bridge over the divide by having a government which is half center-left and half center-right.
Yes.
So this is the golden middle. Maybe if that will happen, then you will see some modification of Israeli policy when it comes to the Palestinian issue. When it comes to combating Iranian aggression and expansion and terrorism and nuclear efforts and so forth, this is obviously the interest of many countries in the Middle East to see stopped, and of these there are no differences. Now, coming to the issue of corruption. Corruption is a problem which is universal today in the world. There isn't one state in the world which is not afflicted by some types of corruption. Sometimes it is petty corruption, sometimes it's high-level corruption. It takes many forms. The other day I saw a compendium of NATO holding discussions among themselves, the British, the Americans, the French, the Germans, how they can combat corruption within their own top governments, like how contracts are sometimes illicitly given, how the activities of lobbyists sometimes distort the national interests of corruption has become a problem worldwide. Today, you find that in the extractive industries, you find that in the defense industries, because that's where the big money is, and that's why where we have high-level regulation. So Israel too has become afflicted by that.
So Mr. Uzi, just to interrupt you for a moment. So for the Israeli people, corruption is a secondary issue, and of course, Prime
It's
Minister
not a secondary.
Prime Minister has been successful in putting Israel, interest in worldwide. That becomes his primary, interest, and public accept that way.
It's not the public; it's the law. The law. Most of the democracies do have an application of the law and the notion of the superiority of the law and the equality before the law. And it just so happened that some cronies of Netanyahu's, including his private lawyer, a nephew, and so forth, has become implicated in some of those scandalous defense problems. And now Netanyahu has been found, was indicted for suspicion of being a recipient of bribes and possibly acting against the law. Now the machinery of the law is sorting itself out. And here you find the irony. It could be that whereas politically Netanyahu still enjoys support, but not majority necessarily, he may have, should the legal process sort itself out, he may lose his job because of some silly failure of character. That's the fact of life. For the moment, he's struggling against all hope. He's trying to change the legislation. He criticizes the police, the prosecutors. He's fighting for himself. But isn't that a pity?
Yes.
Ideally, we should all have public servants who enjoy the privileges of being leaders, and they're given a lot for that, but they also have to observe the law. And I myself, let me just give you a discussion I had with Mr. Netanyahu. I told him, Bibi, since
Yes.
we are the same age, said, listen, you are my superior in 3 ways. First, you are the head of the National Security Council. Second, you are the chief executive of the nation, and I'm part of the executive branch. And thirdly, you appointed me twice, and I shouldn't take that lightly. You gave me your support. I am thankful for that. So for all 3 counts, I'm completely obligated to you, morally, functionally, administratively.
Yes.
But you too have something which is superior to you, and that's the law.
Yes.
And you cannot force me to break the law.
It was great of you, telling him, in his face, of course. But I also like to know the reason behind his cancellation, his visit to India. He cancelled his visit to India twice. What were the reasons, for his cancellation? Is it just because of the election?
Here I have to explain, this is Netanyahu's style. He canceled practically everything. He was supposed to go to Japan yesterday. There was a coronation.
Yes.
He was supposed to be there.
Our president was there. Yes.
Yeah, and he canceled it. Why? Because this is his style. Always to re-examine everything and ask what is urgent now. And he always acts on what he feels is priority at one moment. So now he is in the midst of a crisis. And you see, the reason he intended to come here was also part of a campaign to show that he has a great friend in Modi, and 2 great leaders socialize, tap each other on the back. That was, to him, would have been something beneficiary. But because of the political situation, he had to cancel, and he is not sensitive to the fact that in so doing, sometimes people are offended. Let me tell you a story. In September 2010, he was scheduled to visit China. Then, at the last minute, some silly crisis developed between us and the Americans and the Palestinians, and he decided to stay and to go to Washington instead to resolve the crisis. Now, you cannot tell a story that you are ill because everybody saw you travel to Washington. So he had to explain that to the Chinese that something came up. They did not forgive us. It took 4 long years until they agreed to see him again, because countries take offense. And Netanyahu is doing that both domestically and internationally, sometimes with insufficient sense of decorum. And that, particularly in certain countries, they sometimes take offense. It should. He's a great admirer of India. He's a great admirer of Modi. He feels India is great, as most Israelis do.
Yes.
And I'm sure that we should come here just as much as Indians should come to Israel.
Mr. Uzi, it's also imperative to talk about the geopolitical and environmental next to you. Situation in Syria, situation in Iran, Middle East is burning also. But Middle East also at the transition stage. How do you look at the situation now? Your neighborhood, your surroundings. Is it turning better for you?
No. The Middle East today remains and is getting riskier than before. And that's a pity. The Middle East has been a source of instability in so many ways in the last decades. Terrorism coming out from the Middle East, mostly Palestinian, Muslim, and so forth. But also proliferation has been happening in the Middle East. We stopped it in Syria, others stopped it in Libya. but in Iran it's still progressing. Many regional skirmishes are taking violent form, and the most tragic one is Syria. Look, in Syria, you had 500,000 innocent civilians lost their lives. And on account of what? On account of their own leader not having any scruples, using chemical weapons against his own people. That's mind-boggling. This is a tragedy of disproportionate scope. And it is still there. It's not been resolved yet. So you have now many flashpoints all over the Middle East. Some more local in Libya, in North Africa. Some have to do with the vacuum created in Iraq, the civil war. Still you have some unrest in Egypt. Still you may have some unrest in Jordan. You have Saudi Arabia being attacked by the Iranians. And you have Lebanon, which is always, so it is replete with problems. Why am I saying that the situation is riskier? If you look at two factors, one is the possibility that things will escalate into more violence. Let us declare violence is the thing we want to avoid, because violence, war is destructive. So all we can say is that in all those fronts, the risks of further escalation is present. Hamas being a radical Islamic extremist organization bombing Israel with rockets. Hezbollah, which is a proxy of Iran. All these areas, either they equip themselves or feel themselves emboldened, or they are pushing. Now you have Turkey entering into the fray. So I'm concerned. We are confronted by multiple flashpoints, as I said, all of which have some possibility of further escalation. Not necessarily all the way, because the parties sometimes do it in a controlled way so as not to bring upon themselves too tough a reaction. But at the same time, the pressures for crossing certain lines or escalating even further this year are greater than before. You have international participation. China is extending its influence into the Middle East and further. It is not encouraging violence, but it is felt. America is withdrawing, and in so doing is undercutting its local allies, which is a reputational risk, which is very, very dangerous. And you do not have the stature of leaders and the mood that can bring about some relaxation of those tensions, with characters like Erdogan, who is a flamboyant Islamicist, populist leader who simply knows no restraint. Look what is done. With people like Assad, who bombed his own people. With leaders, there is, I cannot see the international configuration that could do something that would ameliorate problems in the immediate future. So we have to be strong and be restrained. We should not be the ones who provoke. We should not be the ones who are quick and trigger happy. But we should be resolute. Hope that by balancing, by restraining, we would reduce the chances of dangerous.
Mr. Rosito, fundamentally I understand. Now we talk about asymmetrical situation. There is no conventional battlefield now which you confront your enemies. Israel and your agency Mossad, which you have been the part of, way back, devised strategy and talked about such situation which is now looming large at the world everywhere. India is also victim of such asymmetrical warfare. We always confronted by terrorists, who attack us from different corners. Give us a surprise attack, which we find it sometimes difficult to deal with. Having said that, I also understand the Synergia Foundation, their theme is also based on the future of defense, future of security, how we tackle that. Your immense experience in Mossad, how do we see situation turning into, how can we tackle such situation now, when asymmetrical warfare is looming large, you don't have enemies which you see, what is the best way to do that?
if only I knew. You see, strategy has always been a difficult art because asymmetries always existed. The question is to seek always for the terrains and the capacities in which you have an advantage, and to do so in ways that neutralize to the maximum extent your adversary's capacity to do you harm. But which tactics to employ vary. Sometimes it's balancing, and sometimes it's an offensive action to do. So I cannot tell you what could be done. Furthermore, some of those new technologies have only begun to shape the landscape of warfare in ways which are not fully clear. Some of those instruments put an enormous burden on us on the defending side. It becomes so costly that the very act of defending yourself is already destructive because it needs a diversion of budgets and funds. So maybe a more preemptive, a more proactive strategy would be the more efficient one. I don't know. These are the things that we have to struggle with. But what one can say is say the obvious. One is that like-minded nations that share the same problems but also the same values could often benefit from cooperation in those areas, because the pooling of resources, the pooling of know-how, the pooling of capabilities sometimes give you greater punch. Secondly, to try to seek to introduce as many barriers to escalation, because things could go out of hand very easily. And once things break out, it could be very destructive. So to maximize the use of either diplomatic means or arms control capabilities, even with your adversaries, you can come, and there have been instances, for example, in which Pakistanis and Indians have commonly addressed certain issues and have come to certain practical solutions. That's good. Even if you cannot put full confidence in that, still it's an improvement, and sometimes small improvements matter. And at the same time, we have to be able to defend ourselves, and we cannot leave exposures unattended. So much of the burden falls on the security agencies, and they have to do their job. They should be allowed to do it, and one should do it with the best of intelligence, also in the intellectual sense. Use science whenever science offers something to gain, but there are no silver bullets. No. Luck. Prayer.
Mr. Uzi, my last question to you would be, we have been a friend, of course, but do you see India-Israel bilateral relation taking a new shape, a new dimension in area as diverse in agriculture, in technology, in startup? Do you see that unfolding now?
Of course, I see that. Yes, here, when you talk about agriculture, this is a good example because, again, because of its special circumstances, Israelis have been more innovative and have put more science and technology into improving the yields of agriculture, better water management. And India is the opposite side of having such quantities that you need to move things. You need greater efficiencies and better know-how so as to benefit from that possibility. So I think there is room for that. But again, this has to do with national priorities, yours and ours. And also, when it comes to us, we are very small. And so we cannot come with big size, but we can make a difference. And I think we want badly to do that because I want badly to see India develop further. I traveled across the country, and you can see for yourself that much has been done, a lot has been done, but there is room for more. There are other areas in which we can be of use. I think that we could benefit from your advances in science and technology and even reflection in the various sciences. I think that you have had first-rate people who could benefit and educate us. So I would like to see a much greater conversation and exchanges between scholars and experts in many areas. And then is the area of defense and military, in which we are doing a number of things, and we could do more for mutual benefit. I hope that this domain, of course, develops as much as one could do. I do hope that we are contributing to Indian defense, in the sense that, to the extent we're talking about systems that are designed by Israelis, that they are good. You deserve to have the best for your investment, and we should benefit from this ability to do certain things on scale, because we do not enough scaling to come to even greater efficiencies and quality. But I'm hopeful that we would see this relationship develop even further. I think that the Islamic factor that in the past has been a constraint on some of your diplomacy showed that is no longer as a strict factor, in light of the fact that so many Arab and Muslim countries are now cooperating with us. So why should you be holier than the Pope? So I think this has taken its place, and now we can move without any real inhibition, even in terms of the international positioning, in which Israel has to position itself between East and West, in light of there has been an orientation which we too say, look east, but when we say east, we mean the Gulf, and we mean the Indian subcontinent,
yes.
and we mean Singapore, and we mean Australia, not necessarily China. China is another thing, but that is not necessarily what is being meant by having a vector looking eastward.
So, Mr. Uzi Arad has been an advisor to the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He was also the part of the legendary Mossad, and his experience in dealing with terrorism goes many decades. He's in India at Synergia Foundation initiative, which is all about based on security, future of security. He spoke on Syria, he spoke on Iran, he spoke on global terrorism, and he's also looking forward to have a great relation with India. Thank you, Mr. Uzi. Speaking with Business World, Manish Kumar Jha.
Thank you, and all the best to you and your country.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.